Frank, thank you so much for talking to me. I was wondering if we could start off by having you introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Frank Slazer. I'm the president and CEO of the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration, which is an industry trade group based in Washington that advocates on behalf of our company's interests as well as for more robust NASA exploration and other space science and planetary science programs.
I was just looking at your membership, and you have a lot of well-known space companies like ULA and Collins Aerospace, and then a lot of newish space companies like Paragon and Axiom, and it's a really a broad collection of companies.
Yeah, and I hope to broaden that. We are in the process now of trying to add stakeholders, and so that beyond just companies, although we certainly want to add more companies, reaching out to universities, local economic development authorities, possibly even labor unions, organizations or interests that are also supportive of a robust exploration agenda.
And I guess as part of that, you probably found out about Artemis live just as it was happening.
Pretty close. Yes.
And what did you think about it?
I'm encouraged. I've been encouraged for a while now because it seems to me that the programs needed to get back to the moon, actually get back into deep space, are showing surprising tenacity. Whether it's the Constellation elements, which even after Constellation was canceled, a large launch vehicle, a crewed spacecraft for deep space exploration, we're still, kept alive, or the fact that we've now transitioned between a Republican administration to a Democratic administration. We've had flips in various chambers of Congress over the last several years, and yet support for returning to the moon has stayed strong and stayed positive. And so I'm very encouraged that we're seeing the kind of long-term commitment that's necessary to make deep space exploration successful.
There was just a hearing yesterday in the Senate. Jim Bridenstine had come back and had talked, and one of the things he talked about was the challenges with creating international partnerships in a climate where space policy changes every 4 years.
Yeah, it's a bit more stable than that, but it is certainly something you have to worry about. And like I say, I think we're getting close enough. I've been around this loop a few times. Once you start having hardware flying, programs tend to stabilize. That's what happened with Shuttle. That's what happened to the ISS. And so I'm very encouraged that we're actually going to continue that process forward.
My original plan with this project was to interview people at Starbucks, on the street, at the mall, just everyday people. Actually, I kind of wanted to interview non-space people, but if this is a time capsule for the future, that would be kind of a weird collection of things. Nobody knows anything about space. Nobody's interested. But of the people that aren't in space, about 80% of them have no idea we're going back to the moon. And I was wondering, what kind of a challenge does that present for you and your organization?
If we were more of a grassroots organization, I would say it would be a big problem. I think it's still a problem relative to, I think, the enthusiasm I think people have once we start doing things. It's kind of like what you've seen recently with the commercial suborbital, and actually even orbital with the SpaceX tourism flights. Those programs have been in development for years. 99% of the public had no idea they were going on. And once you start launching people, once you start executing missions, every eye is on it, every network is on it, and the enthusiasm just builds. So I'm pretty confident when we start with Artemis 1 next year that you're going to start seeing much more awareness of it, much more interest, and I think we'll see that that's starting to change.
Did you get a chance to see the first time that we went to go to the moon?
I did. Matter of fact, it's one of the probably biggest impacts on my life, and also one of the things I remember best about my time growing up. I probably spent every day. I'd come home from school and there was an Apollo mission going, and PBS at the time was the only network after Apollo 11, maybe 12, that would carry like live stream everything the astronauts were broadcasting. So, I mean, I literally recall, watching hours of astronauts roaming around on the moon and doing research and uh, jumping and, using golf clubs and things. I mean, I saw that real time on television, and it was just, it's incredibly impactful on me. And a number of people from my generation, I'm not the only one by any means, but I think that I kind of think of us as the Apollo generation. We were kind of inspired to go into STEM fields and pursue STEM careers because of this amazing thing we saw that science and technology could do for us. And it never left. It's still there now.
That's interesting. I didn't realize PBS had continuous coverage. Remember interviewing people like Rod Pyle, who said that he was watching and was mad whenever they went to Lucy reruns. So I guess they didn't have PBS in his area at the time.
Yeah, it's like everything else. You wind up with PBS was just getting started, I think, at the time, maybe, but it's like everything else. After the first couple of missions, they started covering all the highlights, like the landing or the ascent from the lunar surface or something like that, or coming down the ladder at the lunar module for the first time. But of course, then after Apollo 13, they came back for 14, did a lot of coverage. But PBS was pretty consistent throughout that time frame, putting on live coverage, which is just astonishing.
And at the time, did you feel like the enthusiasm and knowledge about it was widespread, or was it really concentrated with just a few people that were interested in it?
I think for the first mission, it was especially widespread. For the subsequent missions, particularly after 13, when 14, 15, 16, and 17, it was kind of like what it is now for the ISS. I think everybody, most people in this country are aware we have a space station. Most people are aware we have people in orbit. I think they'd probably be surprised to hear it's been like that for 20 years, that there's literally a generation that's never known not having people in space. So it gets to be a background noise. You kind of think about the early days of aviation. When aviation first started off, they used to have these biplanes after World War I that would go around to these small towns and do aerial acrobatics and things like that. And the whole town would turn out. Everybody would come out to watch these amazing flying machines. You don't see that so much now, even at airports or anywhere else, because we're used to it. It's a normal human condition to become accustomed to it. But for the people who are interested and for the people who are aware of it and think about it, I think it's a persistent presence, and that's a good thing.
One thing about the barnstorming days of airplanes was there's a lot of personal risk and a lot of excitement, and you felt like you're on the edge of something. And I think maybe the interest in Apollo 13 was a similar type of thing. People were, there's really something real at risk. Will these people make it or not? And even coming now, I just finished watching a Korean series called Squid Games, which
Oh yeah, well,
so I mean, it almost seems like that the public's really interested in kind of like those stories where they're not quite so sure that people are going to make it, or there's real life and limb at risk.
That's one of the reasons why launch is always the most eye-catching thing that's out there, right? So ISS is up there. We do launches of crew and cargo and that sort of thing. The amount of coverage the ISS gets now is not zero, but it's nowhere near what we used to get. We had a shuttle mission. Every time a shuttle mission launched, there was always some coverage of that mission going off. And it's that same thing, that element of danger, the fact that, they're essentially riding a bomb to space in terms of the amount of energy contained in that external tank and then the solid rocket boosters.
And, I think a lot of people feel like that the reason we had the public support for Apollo was trying to beat the Russians. And so with Apollo 11, we actually did that. And I think the real surprising thing is not that we quit after Apollo 17, but that there was actually an Apollo 12. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I guess I'd have to say that in terms of beating the Russians, that was a big part of the focus. Although studies have shown that I think a majority of the public was not supportive of Apollo. I mean, it's like 40, 50, 45, 48% of the public supported Apollo all the way up until Apollo 11. And then after Apollo 11, it went up, to the 60, 70% range of approval. People were like really impressed by the achievement. But it's like anything else. I think Apollo was not as well thought out relative to the objectives once you get there. There was such a focus on getting there first and such a focus on flags and footprints and getting those first lunar samples back. I mean, you look at what NASA did at the time. I think the first time we actually had a geologist on the moon was the last mission, Apollo 17. And so I think for NASA, they could have done a better job in terms of like portraying what this was leading to, or why we were going back, and where we were going on the lunar surface. Even now, it's amazing to me. Sometimes you'll hear people say, "Been there, done that. Why are we going to the moon?" And if you actually look the footprint of the moon, if I recall correctly, I think the surface of the moon is about equivalent to North America, and we've made half dozen little stops, and mostly right around the equator, on the near side of the moon. And there is just so much we haven't explored yet, and there's so much that remains to be discovered, and I don't think people appreciate that.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody questions a second or third trip to Disney World, but going back to the moon for a seventh time, that's questionable.
Yeah.
Um, well, with this next trip to the moon, one of the goals that's been emphasized a lot, and I think it's small enough and put out there enough, that people might think that's the sole goal of landing the first woman and the first person of color, which I think are worthy things to do. But I wonder what kind of risk we might have in terms of the public, after that first landing going, well, you've achieved your goals. Why are you going back?
Yeah, there's always that risk. I think NASA is starting to prepare for putting this in context. So, and I don't think that same context was there the last time. I was a kid at the time, so I might not have remembered very well. But the thing about it is that the thing about right now is they already have a geologist and the training crew for the Artemis missions, and the astronauts they've already selected. So they're already looking at the science mission. It's already being talked about in the context of using the moon as a proving ground and a place to get our what we need, either technically or in terms of human factors and everything else, to be able to go on to Mars and to be able to do in situ resource utilization, really just prepare people to live off planet for an extended period of time. And I think that context is essential, because then it starts looking more like, it's not like just taking a piece of space station up back in 1998. Oh, we're done. Like, why do we need more pieces of station up? No, it's part of this bigger project to create this laboratory in space where people will live and work for literally decades. And I think space station did get portrayed that way. And so when shuttle was going up, deploying the station, I think it was always in that context. I think that'll be the context they put on the Artemis missions. I don't think it'll be like one and done, like with the Apollo 11 landing. Are we going to beat the Soviets or something like that? I think they'll avoid that this time. Certainly, we're going to try to make sure that happens.
Exactly. Well, I get the impression that in the 70s and 80s, a lot of people felt like it was just a matter of time before they could personally take their own trip to space. Pan Am had that thing about a trip to the moon. And it feels like that optimism and enthusiasm that may have existed in the 70s, 80s has really evaporated. I think there's really nobody that's under the impression now that they'll have a chance to personally go to space. And I was wondering if you agreed with that assessment and what you thought the implications might be.
I don't know how many people think about it that way. I think I've seen surveys where something like 40 or 38%, something like that, of the public say they'd like to go to space someday. I think more and more, as you see some of the commercial tourism flights happening, even though they're not going anywhere close to the moon, people are going to start seeing this as more of a tangible thing. It's not an unrealistic expectation to think that I'm never going to do that. When you think about, I think less than 600 people with 600 individuals have gone to space since the history of the space program. So it's not exactly with a planet with 6-7 billion people that the odds are very good it's going to be you, right? On the other hand, I think that the feeling is definitely going to start getting out there that we as a society are going to keep going, and more people will do it. And whether or not, there'll be a few that, if there's not that many that dream of becoming fighter pilots or dream of becoming, mountaineers and scaling Everest. But the fact that those things are not impossible, and that if you apply yourself early in your life and study hard and, do all the right things relative to your personal, development, you've got a real chance of doing those amazing things. And I think that'll start to be the thing that, for the average person, they'll see that for their children and their grandchildren as being real possibilities. For individuals going into space, I don't know how many people actually put that much of a context on it. It's just like I said, those other examples. Not everybody wants to be a fighter pilot, but they know people are fighter pilots. If they were really motivated, they could do it. And I think we'll increasingly see that as being more and more of an opportunity.
And all the space development, where do you see it kind of ending up in 100, 200, 300, 400 years? Are we still just making like these little short trips to places? Or do you fundamentally see us actually moving out into the rest of the solar system and the entire system is our home?
Yeah, so I'm both short-term pessimistic and long-term optimistic. When I hear Elon Musk talking about sending hundreds of people on starships and thousands of starships every decade to set up a Martian colony, I'm extremely skeptical that that's going to be feasible or desirable or practical, I guess is a better way to say it. On a longer context, though, I kind of look back to what we've learned about human development as a species. We started out at one time, I think we were down to like 40 or 50 breeding individuals in the Olduvai Gorge in Ethiopia or something like that, somewhere in the Rift Valley of Africa. And we managed over the generations to populate Europe, to populate Asia, to go over the land bridge, to populate North America. And our history as a species didn't end there. What did we do when we got to Europe? We got to Asia. The Polynesians, developed sailing capability to go out in this vast open Pacific and identify islands like Hangaroa out in the middle of nowhere, like 5-hour flight from Chile. And yet there are people there, and there are people there for 1,000 years or something like that before the Western world discovered them. So I think we have to look at it from a context of, I think humanity is adaptable to different environments, and where the environment is not hospitable, we can adapt the environment to us. And I think over time, if you just think of the technical progress we've made in the last few hundred years, terraforming places, creating perhaps new ideas of living in space, like the inside of an asteroid that gets hollowed out or something like that, or the old Gerard K. O'Neill, space colonies type of situations. I think there will, in the longer run, be a huge part of humanity that does live off planet. I don't know if it's going to be a majority anytime foreseeable future, but I think there will be a large part of our species that moves out and takes advantage of the resources of our solar system.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think about how much energy the sun produces and how little that actually falls on the earth. I think the proportion is like 1/700th billionth of the sun's energy actually falls on the earth, and that's powered everything that we've known, weather, life, everything. And there's just so many resources out there like energy, that we could figure out some way to harvest. It could be transformational, I think.
One of the things I like that Bezos sometimes talks about is, what if there were 1 trillion human beings? I mean, there certainly would never be the room for that on this planet. And by the way, one of the biggest reasons I think over time to move off planet is to help assure that we don't destroy the earth, to help make sure that we tap into resources from elsewhere. Hopefully we can get the cost down to the point where, and this is, probably 100 or certainly more years in the future, where it's realistic. You don't need to do mining here. You can just bring minerals in, or from off planet and that sort of thing, and restore areas back to natural environments that we now use for production of, whether it's energy or whether it's raw materials like wood or ores, things like that. I think eventually over time you'll see those types of resources being brought in from elsewhere, and it'll be good for the planet. Not necessarily that it's cheaper. I mean, I find it hard to believe going out of the gravity well, going somewhere else in the solar system and bringing it back I don't know if that's ever going to be cheaper than just digging a hole and taking something out of the ground. But on the other hand, if you think about the ecological impact of that on the planet, it might be a trade that it gets to be an affordable thing, where you stop doing it just because you want to preserve the environment.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on the technology and you build a $100 million probe that goes out to an asteroid and gets resources, removes the asteroid into Earth orbit. The total cost of that's just going to be ground operations plus the 100 million and the time it takes to do that. So it could be Interesting.
It's astonishing how much, once you get out of the Earth's gravity well, how much you can do. I mean, it's, that's like getting out of the Earth's orbit is, or even just getting off the surface into orbit is like, 85, 90% of going anywhere in the solar system. It's just astonishing.
Um, if it was safe and affordable, would you take a trip to space?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. I even put a bid in on the St. Jude Hospital seat on the Inspiration 4 one, but of course I didn't win that lottery, but absolutely.
I did too. I was like, wow, where's my notification whenever they were
Yeah,
delaying?
I wasn't really expecting to win it, but why wouldn't you take the shot? And if I were to come into some, a few years from now, if I were to somehow come into some bequest or some unexpected landfall of resources, I might think about trying to book one of these commercial tourism flights just for the experience. I mean, it's just something I've thought about, known people who have done it my entire life, and it'd be cool to actually experience it yourself.
So I kind of imagine these set of interviews as being like a time capsule for people in the future.
Sure.
Imagine a high school student in Mars being assigned a project of what was humanity like right before we took those next steps on the moon. And is there something about our time now and the challenges and opportunities we face that you think would be good to kind of capture for that future generation?
I think the biggest thing, and this ties into resources from the solar system, I think the biggest challenge I think we face, that's, I don't know if it's civilization ending, but climate change. How are we going to address this thing that has built up over decades, and that we're classically trying to turn a battleship or an aircraft carrier? It's really hard to change human civilization from the patterns of energy use and consumption that we've grown up with for literally generations, that unfortunately is now to the point where the environment could change in a way that tens of millions of people could be killed or displaced, and literally places like Florida and low-lying places like New Orleans, possibly even New York City, become unrecognizably flooded. And within lifetime of somebody being born today, I mean, it's conceivable by the end of the century we could have the Santa Monica Pier flooded. You could have downtown Washington having a few islands where the Washington Monument stick up above where the Potomac is, and the Lincoln Memorial, and you have to take boats around to see these places. I think we obviously are going to have to confront that. And I think this space exploration and the developing space resources such as energy, as you mentioned earlier, I think will likely play a place in helping to resolve that. And I certainly hope so. Certainly, space has been a big part of understanding the planet in ways we probably never could have without the access to 24/7 coverage, being able to watch storms develop, being able to watch the cycles of the world, whether it's, you wind up connections you never would have thought of on the ground become visible from space. So for instance, the fresh water melting off of Antarctica, just even the normal, not even just the global climate change process, but the normal seasonal off melt from Antarctica puts very heavy, water that's cold in there, and you wind up with upwelling off the coast of Africa that people wind up, getting this nutrient-rich part of the ocean that leads to, more fish that allow people to get protein along the coastal regions of Africa. Making that kind of connection from the ground is really difficult. But from space, with the sensors we put up there, with the satellites we've got up there, we can just see so much more how the world is interconnected in ways we hadn't before. I think that knowledge is going to be pivotal to both changing people's attitudes about climate change and understanding that we really have to do something about it, and also understanding that it is real and it is something that we need to change, need to take steps on.
Yeah, that's such a true point. Well, Frank, that's pretty much all the questions I had. Did you have any questions for me or anything that you wanted to talk about?
One thing I just would emphasize that vision. I mean, we ought to think about these not as like individual programs or individual efforts to land boots on the moon or something like that. We ought to think about this in the bigger historical context. And these programs are expensive. These programs take a long time. I forget what the number is, but it was decades between the landing of Columbus in the New World and before the first European settlement was put there. We just have to realize this is a long game. And I think sometimes we get a little bit over enthused. Certainly if you talk to 14-year-old me watching the Apollo 17 mission, I would have thought by now we'd have something like Space 1999 Moon Colony or 2001, moon base down at Clavius, and we'd all be able to go there for maybe a high price ticket, but at least be able to go there. And those expectations were probably never realistic. But the idea that we've now been in space now for over 60 years, and we've gotten so much out of it relative to relative to improving life on our planet, as well as so much understanding of the universe right now. It's just it's astonishing to me. I've watched most of it during my course of my life, and I think we'll have even more to see in the future.
I'm looking forward to seeing what comes. Oh, one last thing I wanted to get your thoughts of. I feel like the 2020s are what the people in the 1960s thought the 1970s would be.
I don't know. I mean, at the time, you have to understand that the 60s was just a tumultuous time, particularly 68. We had presidential candidates assassinated, national leaders like Martin Luther King assassinated. We had the war in Vietnam war in Vietnam was nothing like Afghanistan or Iraq in recent memory, where maybe a couple of thousand people at the most might die in a year in an invasion of Iraq. You were having every night on the TV news, they would talk about dozens of losses of casualties. And the 70s were, unfortunately not a pleasant decade in some respects, because there was inflation, there was there was oil, shortages and things like that. Inflation got really high. But the 70s were still kind of a relief compared to what we were going through in the late 60s. Now, early 60s, very optimistic, but by the 68, 69 timeframe, things had gotten very dark. And so the 70s were kind of like a relief. I think people kind of turned more inward and focused inward. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that we stay engaged globally. I hope we stay engaged for the planet for things like climate change. And I'm pretty confident that will happen. But there's always that risk. You turn insular, you could try to, just stop exploring, stop moving forward. But all the signs I'm seeing right now, one of the few things in our time that's very polarized that we seem to have a consensus around is continuing to invest in space and exploration. I'm very encouraged by that.
Well, thank you so much, Frank. I really appreciate your time and your views, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a great one. If you ever wind up putting up something online that some kind of compilation that I could go see, not just what I said, but some other people may have said, that'd be very interesting to get that link.
Well, I put them all unedited on countdowntothemoon.org. So okay. I have like 600 plus interviews at this point, 1,100 more to go. So they're all out there. I'll send you the link.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good day.